All right, everyone, get ready, because today we are doing a deep dive into a movie from 1987.
Ooh.
Bloody New Year, a British horror flick
I've heard of this one, yeah.
that's developed a bit of a cult following over the years.
Right?
So this one looks like a real wild ride from what I've skimmed through.
Oh, yeah, definitely wild teens trapped in a time warp.
A haunted hotel.
And a director who doesn't exactly have fond memories of this project.
Yeah, I think it has all the makings of a So Bad It's Good classic.
For sure.
As you know, if you've seen it, the movie centers on a group of teenagers who end up shipwrecked on an island.
Oh, okay.
Stumble across a deserted hotel.
Classic horror trope right there.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But this isn't just any abandoned seaside resort. You know, this one's stuck in a New Year's Eve time warp from 1959.
Oh, interesting.
So it's like the hotel itself is haunted by the past.
I see.
And speaking of being haunted by the past, this film seems to be stuck in a bit of a time warp as well.
What do you mean?
Well, it was released under multiple titles: Time Warp, Terror, Horror, Hotel.
Oh, wow.
So, you know, it just adds to this feeling of the film being a bit of a hidden gem, almost forgotten.
Yeah. I mean, that always happens with these, like, lesser-known horror movies, right?
Right. And, you know, this movie was made on a shoestring budget, just £60,000.
What?
Yeah, that's practically nothing for a film.
That's wild. How did they even...
It really makes you wonder how they pulled it off.
Right.
Especially considering they filmed the whole thing in a mere 4 to 5 weeks.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That is a feat.
It is. And, you know, the director, Norman J. Warren, he was a big fan of 1950s B movies.
Okay.
And he wanted to infuse the film with that aesthetic.
Uh-huh.
You know, those classic cheesy horror vibes.
I gotcha.
Well, the budget, you know, prevented the entire film from being set in that era.
Right.
The time warp element itself might have been born from a real-life event.
Now, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
Warren was apparently inspired by this incident on a Scottish island where a disease control experiment went terribly wrong.
Oh, wow.
And this led to the entire island being quarantined.
Oh, my God.
Creating this unsettling sense of isolation and you know, the unknown that clearly resonated with Warren.
Yeah.
And you can definitely see those themes reflected in Bloody New Year.
Yeah. Wow. That's eerie how reality can be creepier than fiction sometimes.
Absolutely. And speaking of reality, let's talk about where Bloody New Year was actually filmed.
Okay.
They used Barry Island, a real seaside resort in Wales.
Oh, cool.
As the backdrop for all the creepy happenings.
So they actually filmed on location.
They did. And, you know, choosing a real location like that, it must have given the film a certain, you know, gritty realism.
Right. It's not like a stuffy studio. It's like an actual place.
Exactly. Grounding it in a tangible world, despite the outlandish premise.
I like that.
And they didn't just film on location. They really immersed themselves in the community.
How so?
Well, they recruited a local rock and roll preservation society as unpaid extras.
Really?
Yeah, so it's like they turned the whole production into a community theater project, but just, you know, a little more terrifying.
That's amazing. I love that.
It is a pretty cool little detail.
Yeah, for sure.
And it didn't stop there. They even incorporated footage from the director's friend, free of charge, of course.
Wow.
Yeah, free footage always helps when you're working with a tiny budget.
Of course. Yeah, they were working with what they had.
Exactly. There's a certain scrappy ingenuity to it all, wouldn't you say?
I would definitely say that.
They even filmed scenes at the Barry Island Fun Fair, using the public as extras in exchange for free rides.
Oh, that's smart.
Right.
Get the community involved.
Exactly. It's a masterclass in low-budget filmmaking.
Definitely is.
They used what they had, and they used it well.
Yeah.
For instance, Friars Point House was used as the spooky hotel.
Oh, I see.
Adding to the film's unsettling atmosphere.
Right.
And then the pageant rooms served as the backdrop for those haunting ballroom scenes.
Mm-hmm.
And they even utilized a disused tower block for Janet's death scene.
Interesting.
Which, you know, must have amplified the feeling of isolation and decay that kind of pervades the film.
I can see that.
It's like the time warp itself is slowly eroding everything it touches.
Yeah.
Speaking of those eerie scenes, we can't forget Mark Powley's dedication, or perhaps his lack of self-preservation.
Oh, what did he do?
He actually dangled from a real cliff without any safety equipment for that scene.
Seriously? Wow, that's commitment.
Talk about commitment to the craft, right?
It really is.
But on a less death-defying note, they did have to tone down the violence in that climactic outboard motor propeller scene.
Oh, right.
To secure a less restrictive age rating.
Makes sense.
Given that Bloody New Year isn't exactly known for its gore.
Right.
It makes you wonder how intense the original vision for that scene was.
Yeah, like what were they going to do?
Right. It's almost like we're catching a glimpse into an alternate, even more horrifying version of the film that never came to be.
That's a good point.
So then there's the music.
Yes, the soundtrack.
Nick Magnus composed the score.
Yeah.
And it perfectly captures that eerie atmosphere of the film.
It does.
And his band, Cry No More, contributed several original songs, Recipe for Romance,
Well, yeah.
Boys Don't Cry, and my personal favorite, Caveman Rock.
Oh, that's a good one.
It's the perfect blend of 80s synth pop with a spooky twist.
Yeah, it definitely fits the whole time-warped horror flick vibe.
Right, it sets the mood.
Definitely.
So the big question, what did the critics think of Bloody New Year?
Well, let's just say the reception was mixed.
Oh.
Variety, for example, dismissed it as a negligible horror film rehashing the corniest format available.
Ouch.
Yeah, not exactly a glowing review.
No, but surely not everyone hated it, right?
Oh, no, absolutely not.
Were there any redeeming qualities that the critics picked up on?
Yeah, the later reviews were a bit more nuanced, with some critics even finding things to admire about the film.
Right.
Kim Newman, for example, while calling it a feeble dump bin video quickie,
That's hilarious.
which I love, acknowledged its potential for cult appeal.
Okay, so bad it's good kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Dennis Schwartz, on the other hand, found it goofy and brutal, but criticized the lack of plot.
So we've got a range of reactions already.
Yeah.
From scathing dismissal to grudging admiration.
It happens.
I'm starting to see why this movie has become such a cult classic.
Right, it's polarizing.
It's divisive, to say the least.
And that divisiveness just adds to the intrigue, doesn't it?
It does. It really does.
It becomes less about whether the film is objectively good or bad,
Right.
and more about the experience it evokes.
It's about the conversation it sparks. And speaking of sparking conversation, we can't ignore the fact that the director, Norman J. Warren, openly disliked Bloody New Year.
Oh, yeah, he was not a fan.
He called it a bloody nightmare.
Wow.
Not exactly a ringing endorsement. Yeah, that's pretty rough.
It does make you wonder what went on behind the scenes to lead to such a strong reaction from the director.
Right, like what happened?
Was it simply the budgetary constraints, or was there something deeper, a fundamental disconnect between his artistic vision and the final product?
Yeah, that's a good question. Something to ponder.
That is a question we'll have to explore further as we continue our deep dive into Bloody New Year.
Looking forward to it.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Bloody New Year. You know, it's kind of crazy to think that the director hated it so much.
Yeah, he really didn't hold back with his criticism.
Not at all. He basically called it a bloody nightmare.
Strong words.
And even blamed it for driving him away from filmmaking altogether.
Like he was scarred by the experience.
It really does sound like a troubled production.
It does.
Makes you wonder what really went wrong behind the scenes.
Right.
You know, Warren seemed particularly frustrated with the producers. He felt like they were prioritizing speed and budget over artistic integrity, which is a common struggle in filmmaking, right?
Absolutely.
The eternal battle between art and commerce.
Right. And he specifically mentioned that the tight budget negatively impacted the sound design and the music.
Right.
He even went so far as to say that the music just doesn't work.
I find that interesting because we were just talking about the synth-heavy score and how it adds to the film's atmosphere.
Right, me too. It's almost like...
Goes to show how subjective art can be.
Yeah, one person's flaw is another person's essential element.
Exact.
Right, the synth-heavy soundtrack. It might not be for everyone.
Sure.
But it definitely adds to that overall sense of unease.
Right, and temporal dislocation.
Yeah, it's like those synth sounds are echoing through the time warp itself.
I like that.
Adding another layer of distortion to an already distorted reality.
Yeah.
Yeah. I could see how some might find it jarring, but I think it works.
Yeah.
Within the context of this low budget, almost DIY aesthetic.
I agree. It has a certain charm to it.
Right. And remember, this was the 80s. Synths were everywhere. It was like peak synth era. So
like totally.
In a way, the soundtrack acts as this time capsule,
Definitely takes you back.
Transporting it back to that era of bold sonic experimentation.
For sure.
It's like the music itself is trapped in the time warp.
Ooh, I like that.
Forever looping back on itself.
Yeah.
Mirroring the cyclical nature of the narrative.
It all ties together.
It really does.
Yeah.
So Warren's criticism of the production, it raises this interesting point about the tension between artistic vision and commercial constraints.
Right. How much control does a director really have? It's a
I know.
balancing
It
act.
makes you wonder how many potentially great films have been compromised by these kinds of conflicts.
I'm sure there are tons of stories out there.
Oh, yeah. Probably a lot of lost masterpieces.
Unseen gems.
Right. Hidden away because of budgetary issues or studio interference.
It's a shame.
It is a shame.
But it's the reality of the film industry, I guess.
Yeah, it's a delicate dance.
It is.
Balancing the creative impulses of the director with those practical realities of budget and deadlines.
Always going to make compromises.
And in the case of Bloody New Year, it seems like those forces were really at odds with each other.
Yeah, it didn't quite work out the way Warren envisioned it.
No, not at all. Which begs the question,
That could have been.
what would this movie have been like if Warren had complete creative control?
Right, the ultimate what if.
Would it have been this masterpiece of horror cinema?
Or would it have fallen apart without the producer's guidance?
Right, maybe the limitations actually help shape the film in a way.
That's a good point. Sometimes constraints can breed creativity.
Right, maybe those constraints are what gave the film its unique charm.
Yeah, that scrappy ingenuity we were talking about.
It's like sometimes the best art comes from working within limitations.
Finding those creative solutions.
Right, making the most of what you've got.
Definitely. And there's a certain beauty in that, right?
There is.
Finding the extraordinary within the ordinary.
Exactly. It makes you think about the nature of creativity itself.
Deep thoughts.
Right? Does true artistry flourish under ideal conditions?
Or is it forged in those moments of adversity?
Maybe it's a bit of both.
Probably is a mix of both.
Right. You need that spark of inspiration, but then you also need those challenges to really refine it.
To push you further.
To push you further.
Yeah.
And maybe that's part of the enduring appeal of Bloody New Year. Yeah.
It's a film that was born out of that conflict, that clash of visions and compromises.
And despite all of that, or maybe because of it,
Right.
it's managed to carve out this space for itself in the annals of cult cinema.
It's found its audience.
It has.
The people who appreciate its unique quirks.
Exactly. It's a testament to the fact that even flawed films can resonate with audiences.
Right. It's not always about technical perfection or critical acclaim.
No, sometimes it's about that raw energy, those unexpected twists and turns.
That sheer audacity to be different.
Bloody New Year is a film that refuses to be easily categorized.
It defies genre conventions.
It's a time-warped blend of horror, comedy, social commentary.
All wrapped up in a low-budget package.
And it's a film that lingers in the mind long after the credits roll.
It makes you think.
It does. It prompts us to question our assumptions.
About genre, about filmmaking.
About time itself.
Yeah, time is a slippery concept.
It is, and that's precisely what we've been trying to do with this deep dive.
To peel back the layers.
To take a closer look at this seemingly obscure film and uncover those fascinating layers of meaning.
And creative tension.
Right, and we're not done yet.
There's more to explore.
Join us in part 3, where we'll unravel the mysteries behind the time warp itself.
Ooh, getting to the heart of it.
Exploring its symbolic significance and the questions it raises about our relationship to the past.
Can't wait.
All right, welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into Bloody New Year.
The grand finale.
So we've covered a lot of ground. We talked about the low-budget origins, the director's regrets, even that crazy synth-heavy soundtrack.
Right, it's been a journey.
It has been, but there's one element we haven't fully explored yet.
What's that?
The time warp itself.
Oh, yeah, the heart of the film.
The central premise. This idea of a hotel frozen in a New Year's Eve celebration from 1959.
Still stuck in the past.
But is it just a wacky plot device?
Or is there something deeper going on?
That's what I'm really curious about. On one hand, you have this classic horror trope, right? The isolation, the haunting from the past.
Disruption of the natural order.
Exactly. But the way it's presented in Bloody New Year, it feels different somehow.
It's not so straightforward.
No, it's not. And what's really interesting is that they never explicitly explain the cause of the time warp.
That's true.
We get hints about a plane crash, an experimental cloaking device.
Right. But the details are vague.
Yeah, it's all very mysterious.
It's like they're saying, don't worry about the hows and whys, just go with it.
Exactly. And that ambiguity, I think it's part of what makes the time warp so compelling.
It leaves room for interpretation.
It does. It becomes this blank canvas onto which we can project our own interpretations and anxieties.
Like a mirror reflecting our own fears.
So what are your interpretations? What do you think the time warp represents in the context of the film?
Well, if we connect it to the bigger picture, I think it could be seen as this metaphor for the clash between the past and the present.
Okay, I like that.
You have these teenagers representing the freedom and rebellious spirit of the 1980s.
Right, the youth of the 80s.
Suddenly thrust into this world frozen in the seemingly more innocent,
But also more repressive.
yeah, exactly, era of the 1950s.
A collision of cultural values, a battle between those carefree attitudes of youth and the societal norms of a bygone era.
And that clash, I think it manifests in those supernatural occurrences, the violence, the overall sense of unease that pervades the film.
Right. It's as if the time warp itself is this catalyst.
Exposing the dark undercurrents lurking beneath the surface of both eras.
And it's interesting, you know how we talked about Warren's initial desire to set the entire film the 1950s.
Right, he was really drawn to that era.
And maybe that was his way of exploring these themes more directly.
Immersing the audience in that bygone era and its unspoken tensions.
Right. Like
Yeah.
he was trying to capture this specific cultural moment, a time when social change was brewing beneath this veneer of conformity.
And by injecting these modern-day teenagers into that environment,
Right, throwing them into the mix.
he created this volatile mix of rebellion and repression.
Makes you wonder if Bloody New Year, despite all its flaws and Warren's own misgivings, might actually be a more complex and layered film than it first appears.
It might be more than just a cheesy horror flick.
Right. It's a film that challenges us to think about our own relationship with the past,
How it shapes our present.
how its echoes continue to reverberate through time.
We're all products of our past, in a way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the final takeaway for our listeners? Why should they care about Bloody New Year?
Because it offers a glimpse into the specific cultural moment, a collision of eras that continues to fascinate and unsettle us.
It's a reminder that even the most seemingly straightforward genre fare can hold these hidden depths.
Unexpected layers of meaning.
And it encourages us to dig deeper, to question our assumptions, and to embrace the ambiguity
An open-endedness.
that great art often presents.
It's not always about finding clear-cut answers.
No, it's about the journey, the exploration.
The conversation that it sparks.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe Bloody New Year will become your new cult classic obsession.
Or maybe you'll just have a good laugh at its low-budget charms.
Either way, we hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity.
And given you a fresh perspective on this often overlooked gem.
Thanks for joining us. And remember,
Keep exploring.
keep questioning.
And keep those brain cells firing.
Till next time.